Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives for families of critically ill patients in intensive care so that you can make informed decisions, have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I answered another question from one of our readers, and the question last week was: my 47-year-old sister is in intensive care with pneumonia and the intensive care team wants to pull the plug. Help. You can check out the answer to last week's question by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, I want to answer another question from one of our readers, and the question this week is: I have lost my 62-year-old husband last year in intensive care after cardiac arrest. The intensive care team withdrew treatment against my will. Could he have been saved? This question from Teresa formed part of an email counseling and consulting session with me. Teresa writes: Hi Patrick, I have lost my 62-year-old husband in intensive care last year when he died a few days after he had a cardiac arrest. The intensive care team put a DNR, a do not resuscitate order, on my husband without my permission, but possibly with my adult stepdaughter's permission, when he was given a tracheostomy 6 days after he had a cardiac arrest. At the time, he was still heavily sedated with propofol, Ativan or lorazepam, morphine, heparin and blood pressure medications. After the cardiac arrest, he was treated with hypothermia therapy and he was on a daily kidney dialysis for acute kidney failure. I had to fight with the medical staff in intensive care as he was full cold care and yes to CPR. CPR means cardiopulmonary resuscitation, initially on his admission to ICU if needed. The intensive care team was so very negative and suggested removal of life support at only day 2 to 3 after the cardiac arrest. Patients need more time always, and especially after hypothermia, kidney dialysis, medications, cardiac arrest, induced coma, just to reboot and come back. He responded to me with raised blood pressure and breathing when I came in the room to talk to him and hold his hand. He cried tears when I talked about our kids and when I told him that I was waiting for him. He one time turned his head to me and moved his mouth, but he had a tracheostomy, so he couldn't make any sounds. I could understand him telepathically and I gave him my strength to hang on and fight. I loved him with all my heart and he loved me. I tried to get him transferred to a more specialty cardiac hospital, and the hospital where he was at didn't want to do that either. With everything that I wrote in this email, how long could it have taken my husband to heal as best as possible, and what treatment is best for a patient who has had a cardiac arrest with hypothermia therapy and kidney dialysis, with low blood pressure and coma, possibly anoxic brain injury? I was thinking at the time that it would have been best to go to cardiac critical specialty ICU and be put on an ECMO machine, possible blood transfusions and antibiotics and physical therapy on arms and legs, and wait for the patient to wake up from the coma while playing our loved ones' voices on a cassette player or a CD player and favorite music and touch and hold hands. Maybe a magical kiss from a patient's wife or husband daily. What do you think should have happened in this situation? Many thanks from Teresa. Hi Teresa, thank you for sending this question through, and also thank you for signing up for my one-on-one email counseling and consulting. I'm very sorry to hear that you have lost your 62-year-old husband in intensive care last year. I can only imagine how terrible you must feel, and I can only imagine the loss you are feeling. The circumstances that surrounded your husband's death doesn't sound to me like it was an amicable death either, especially if you felt like the intensive care team was negative from the start, and that the intensive care team used the first opportunity to issue a DNR, do not resuscitate order, and withdrew treatment as soon as they had permission from your adult stepdaughter. I really wish you could have sent this question through before your husband passed away, and unfortunately I currently see an increased number of clients coming to me when it's too late. This is a worrying trend, and I'd rather have you or other families in intensive care seeking out my counsel and consulting before it's too late. I would much rather prefer helping you in a situation that could have helped saving your husband's life. Unfortunately, many families in intensive care still trust the intensive care team blindly, and they still think that they can go it alone, to only find out later that this was a situation where they desperately needed help in order to make the right and informed decisions. You haven't commented on the next of kin or power of attorney situation, and I would assume that you, your husband's stepdaughter, or any other adult children that you have would have been the decision makers in cooperation with yourself and the intensive care team. The issuing of a DNR, do not resuscitate order, or the decision to withdraw treatment should never be made by one or two parties alone, if there are more parties involved that have the best interest of a patient at heart in the decision-making process. Even if your adult stepdaughter agreed to a withdrawal of treatment and the DNR, it still would have needed your and or your other children's input on this crucial decision, unless your stepdaughter was the sole power of attorney. However, that would be very unlikely. For anyone watching this who's in a similar situation and you are unsure about what to do, my advice is clearly to ask for the intensive care unit's protocol or policy regarding end-of-life decisions, withdrawal of treatment decisions, and or DNR, do not resuscitate, or NFR, not for resuscitation orders. Once you have asked for that important information, you will find that most intensive care units are breaching their own policies when it comes to the decision-making process around end-of-life, withdrawal, or limitation of treatment, as well as DNR or NFR. I will elaborate more on this a bit later. Unfortunately, intensive care teams can be very negative in critical situations like this, and they can be particularly negative when it comes to perceived end-of-life situations. You may also want to check out another video that I've made about the difference between real and perceived end-of-life situations. Just type it into Google or in the search book on our website and you'll get to this article and video. Now back to you. Now, from what you are telling me, Therese, I would think that initially the intensive care team was making all the right decisions by starting your husband on cooling therapy and kidney dialysis. You also mentioned the induced coma, the ventilator, the tracheostomy, the sedation, and the blood pressure medication. You was also on heparin, and that all makes sense after cardiac arrest. Even the next steps make sense to me with the cooling therapy. Cooling therapy usually goes for up to 72 hours after cardiac arrest, and it's a therapy that is trying to protect the functionality of vital organs such as the heart, the brain, the kidneys, and the liver. Normally the body gets cooled down to 32 to 33.9 degrees Celsius or 90 to 93 degrees Fahrenheit in order to protect those vital organ functions for up to 72 hours. After 72 hours, a slow rewarming period will commence, and depending on other vital functions such as the heart rate, the heart rhythm, the blood pressure, etc., warming up as well as waking up after the induced coma should be considered. This also usually is followed by a CT of the brain to ensure that there hasn't been any brain damage from the cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest can cause hypoperfusion in the brain due to the lack of oxygen during the cardiac arrest and lead to irreversible brain injury. I don't know what went wrong in your husband's case, because if he had a tracheostomy after 6 days, that would have been a good sign from my perspective. Given that he also had a kidney dialysis, he was off to be getting all the right treatment at the right time as far as I can see. It would have given your husband the opportunity to recover in his own time. Again, 62 years of age is not very old as far as I'm concerned, and he should have been given the opportunity to recover. The fact of the matter and the stark reality in many intensive care units, however, is that often at the first sign that a critical illness may require a prolonged ICU admission, intensive care teams don't want to invest in the required physical as well as the emotional resources that it takes to get a critically ill patient out of intensive care alive. I have counseled and consulted a lady recently who was in a similar situation. You can check the counseling and consultation session out here in this video. The counseling session will explain what to expect after cooling therapy after cardiac arrest. The title of the counseling session is "My son's father had a heart attack and is not waking up in intensive care after cooling therapy. Please help." So check this out by going down under this video in the written version of this blog and click on the link or type it into the search box on our website or on Google. The fact of the matter is that if your husband had no brain injury, that he definitely should have been given the chance of a full recovery in his own time. At the end of the day, the intensive care team will try and make those decisions without much family involvement, because they often see it from the point of view that only they know what's best or what's in the best interest of a critically ill patient. They do so with the knowledge of their financial budget in mind. They do so with the number of critically ill patients in mind who need an ICU bed, and they do so by sizing you and your family up in how likely you are in questioning their decision-making process. I know for a fact that 99% of the families of critically ill patients in intensive care are intimidated by the perceived power and by the perceived authority of the intensive care team. Those families are not making informed decisions. They don't get peace of mind, don't have control, power or influence. In fact, the intensive care team can just walk all over them. It's a sad state of affairs really, and you should have taken a stand in all of this, because everything in life is negotiable. What often makes or breaks such a situation is your and your family's level of preparedness, and also your and your family's willingness to challenge the intensive care team. Given that you didn't really know how to position your husband's diagnosis, his prognosis, as well as his care and treatment, you stood a very low chance in getting what you wanted from the start. You were certainly thinking along the right lines with getting your husband referred to a specialized cardiac ICU with the ability to commence your husband on ECMO. ECMO again could have bought your husband time, and ECMO could have bridged your husband on to be getting a heart transplant. This could have well been a possibility at the age of 62 years. If there was no brain injury, ECMO could have been a definite option. This also leads me to comment on how long it would have taken your husband to recover had he been given the chance. Again, given that he was on cooling therapy, had a tracheostomy and was commenced on kidney dialysis, he was off to the best possible start as far as I can see. It would have really depended on how big the damage of the heart was and what his ejection fraction was at the time. Ejection fraction is the measurement in how well the heart is pumping blood. This would have also determined whether he would have been a candidate for ECMO or not. Furthermore, it would have also depended on the severity of his kidney failure. However, after cardiac arrest, many critically ill patients develop kidney failure that can be reversed. Recovery time without brain damage could have been anywhere between many weeks to many months, again depending on the heart and the option to use ECMO and then have a heart transplant. There would have been no guarantee that a heart transplant would have been successful after ECMO, but the option should have been given from my perspective at the age of 62. If your husband had an anoxic brain injury, again, it would have decreased the odds of your husband recovering and surviving to a level that you and your husband would have been happy with. However, the biggest healer in all critical illness, and especially with head and brain injuries, is often time. And you will probably ask, how much time? And sometimes it may take many weeks or even many months. It really all depends. The fact of the matter is that for whatever reason, you didn't manage to convince the intensive care team to take the steps you wanted them to take, and that's the sad bottom line. And you are right to suggest that love, nurturing as well as playing music and talking to your husband while holding his hands are all factors that help. The more supportive a family is, the higher the chances of survival and recovery. There is no doubt about this in my mind. Again, for anybody watching this, don't let it get to that stage and do your own research. Start learning the things quickly that you need to learn when it comes to the critical illness of your loved one. Start learning how to position your critically ill loved ones, prognosis, their diagnosis, as well as the care and treatment of your critically ill loved one. Do just that and the power dynamics will change and flip in your favor, because the intensive care team doesn't expect you to have this knowledge. You may also become difficult and demanding, or get help and ask for what you want after you have done your own research. So, how can you become the best advocate for your critically ill loved one? Make informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power and influence quickly whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. You get to that all-important feeling of making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power and influence when you download your free instant impact report now by entering your email below. In your free instant impact report, you learn quickly how to make informed decisions, get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free instant impact report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free instant impact report now by entering your email below. In your free instant impact report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions. Discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests. How to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. You get 5 mind-blowing tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power and influence in your situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You'll get crucial behind the scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's Your Questions Answered episode, and I'll see you again next week in another update. Make sure you also check out our blog section for more tips and strategies, or simply send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. Or you can call me, find international phone numbers on our contacts tab. Also, check out our ebook section where you get more ebooks, videos and audio recordings, and where you can also get one-on-one counseling and consulting with me via Skype, over the phone or via email by clicking on the products tab. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.